Hey, it's Gray, and welcome to my video essay. Today, we'll be answering the question, where do words go? Or, perhaps more accurately, why do words go? Today we'll be focusing on a specific type of word called antonyms. Antonyms are pairs of words that have opposite meaning. Think good and bad, happy and sad. And we'll be looking at a specific type of antonym called orphaned negatives. Orphaned negatives are the result of the positive half of a pair of antonyms falling out of use in common English language, therefore orphaning the negative half. Need an example? Tumblr user Lucifer found out that disgruntled is in fact the opposite of gruntled. However, gruntled has fallen out of common use in English, leaving disgruntled as an orphaned negative. Let's take a brief look at how negatives are formed. The easiest way to form an antonym is by adding a negative prefix, such as dis, in, or im, un, non, or d. All of these have the function of negating the word they are attached. Theory number 1, the hierarchical structure of words. And this is where I'm going to drop my nerd alert of the video because this does get pretty technical. However, it's all downhill from here. Let's go back to our list of negative prefixes. If you look at how each of these prefixes are used, they only attach to certain types of words based on the function of that word in the sentence. Let's look at the incapacitate. If you separate it out into its different etymons, you have the prefix in, suffix ate, and the root word capacity. You get the prefix in, the suffix ate, and the root etymon capacity. Now, if we go back to our list of negative prefixes, we can see that in only attaches to adjectives and derivative nouns. If we go back to incapacitate, ate is a suffix that turns nouns into verbs. Therefore, capacitate would be a verb, and in cannot attach to it. In must first attach to capacity, a noun, form incapacity, another noun, before the suffix ate can be added to form a verb. This is fairly common. Generally, prefixes that change are added last. Another word we can look at is debunk. Bunk is a noun, and de is a prefix that attaches to nouns to form verb with opposite meaning. Theory number 2, only negative borrowing. English is a relatively new language, and so a lot of our words were borrowed from much older languages, especially Latin. If we look at prefixes such as ab, in, and im, and dis, these functioned as prefixes in Latin, and therefore were added to words in Latin, and sometimes only the version with the prefix would make it into English. Some examples of this would be absurd, dismember, incognito, impetuous, and invincible. All of these were borrowed directly from their parent language, with the prefix already attached. Now, there are a couple of asterisks here. Absurd is technically a word, but it's only used in math and Arabic grammar. It's an interesting combination. Dismember only became an antonym later on because dismember was used as a verb before member was. And incognito is actually Italian, but that is also derived pretty directly from Latin. This flows very easily into theory number 3, which is obsolete back formation. Typically, words are created by adding prefixes and suffixes, but words can also be created through back formation, which is through the process of removing prefixes and suffixes. If we look at words like incapacitate, impeccable, inept, insipid, non-committal, and unwieldy, all of these green parts were words at one point, but they were created through back formation by chopping off the prefix, and they did not stick around. And most of them you can kind of understand, although I really think we should go back saying F. These words were also formed deliberately to become antonyms, which adds to why they might not have stuck around. Technically, the Oxford English Dictionary does list all of them as active words. However, nobody is going around calling someone F, although personally I think they should be. Once again, a couple more asterisks. Capacitate was only ever used in math by one specific guy, which I think is pretty funny, and sipid was replaced by its eponym sapid, which is a really interesting case of linguistic reversion. Moving on to theory number 4, phrase formation. Sometimes instead of coming from a single word, the word would actually come from mashing all of the word phrases together. Examples of this would be extempore, which comes from the Latin phrase ex tempore, which literally means out of time. Another example would be non plus, comes from the Latin phrase non plus, which means not more or no further. That's not entirely what non plus means these days, so it might make sense why nobody is going around saying plus. Finally, our last theory, the synonymous positive. In some cases, two words started out as antonyms, but eventually ended up with the same meaning, or always had it in the first place. For example, exasperate and aspirate are derived from the same Latin word, and always meant the same thing. Impulsive, impulsive are also derived from the same Latin word, and while at one point they meant opposites, also in the case of incorrigible and unwieldy, corrigible and wieldy at one point meant the opposites of incorrigible and unwieldy, but after the antonym was created, they eventually morphed to have the same meaning. However, this still leaves several words that we don't really know what to do with. What do we do with improvise, uncouth, unkempt, unruly, untoward, and our good old friend disgruntled. Well, now that we've into the linguistic explanations, let's look at two overarching ideas of the whole thing. The first is not inherently linguistic, but more psychological. That is that negative ideas tend to have more staying power. Think about it. If you're looking back on your day and it had both up and down, the downs probably stick in your head more, and may even seem magnified. So, humans needed more words to discuss the nuances of their negative experiences. Think about it. Happy and content usually mean pretty similar things, but unhappy and discontent mean two pretty different things. The other idea is that any loss of distinction is a first step towards a total loss. This very easily explains the synonymous positive, because the two words ended up meaning the same thing, so only one was necessary. Another word that falls into this category is improvise. Provise at one point was its own word that meant the same thing as provide. However, improvise not only meant the opposite of provise, but it also adopted the artistic and theatrical meanings we're used to hearing it in today. Since provise had a synonym, it ended up falling out of use, while improvise stuck around for its unique meaning. This loss of distinction can come in many forms, including the most obvious being synonyms, but also sound, and that's my theory for disgruntled. I have two theories as to how gruntled fell out of use. The first one has to do with its root, grunt. This word has been around for a very long time, since Old English, and originally meant the sound a pig made. Now, I think when we got gruntled, it was meant to be a happy pig sound, but anybody who has ever been around pigs for a significant period of time knows that that sound gets a little grating. So I think that what happened was the increasingly negative connotation produced a cognitive dissonance with the positive meaning of the word. My other theory is the advent of the word grumbled. Grumbled began falling out of common use around the 1620s, and grumbled first became a word around the 1580s. Now, I'm not going to claim that correlation is the same as causation. However, the cognitive dissonance I discussed previously, plus the similarity in sound to grumbled, which also had a negative connotation, may have contributed to gruntled falling out of use. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And if you want to see my sources, here they are. You can also scan this QR code, a full list of the Oxford English Dictionary sources I cited, as well as hyperlink to all of these articles. Thanks again.